John Wick stood at the edge of his modest backyard, staring into the fading twilight. The horizon blazed with the last colors of sunset, casting elongated shadows across a neatly trimmed lawn. At his feet sat Scout, a wiry-haired terrier mix with warm brown eyes. She was more than just a dog to John. In the aftermath of so many personal losses, Scout had become a lifeline. Despite his violent past, kindness and companionship still existed. John ran a hand gently over Scout's ears, feeling the softness of her fur under his fingertips. He'd sworn off the shadows of his old life, bought this small house at the very edge of suburbia, and tried to blend in. No one here knew the real John Wick, infamous assassin, the boogeyman to underworld criminals. They only saw a quiet man who kept to himself, who occasionally chatted with the mail carrier, but otherwise lived peacefully. He took Scout on long walks, visited the local coffee shop for a morning brew, and spent his evenings in solitude, nursing a mind crowded with memories he wished he could forget. That night, he felt the stirring of restless energy. He had planned to relax on the porch, maybe read a worn paperback, but Scout was antsy too, pacing back and forth, tail wagging. "You want to walk?" John asked softly. The terrier's ears perked, and her tail beat an eager rhythm. Smiling, John clipped on her leash, pulling on a light jacket. Together, they set off into the cool evening air, heading down a quiet residential street that led to a small wooded park. The breeze carried the faint scent of pine and distant chimney smoke, reminders that autumn was settling in. The park itself was usually peaceful after dark, lampposts illuminating the walking path. A handful of teenagers might linger at the benches, playing music or sharing phone videos. Occasionally, an older couple would stroll by, exchanging polite nods. But tonight, the place felt emptier, the hush broken only by the rustle of leaves underfoot. Even Scout seemed cautious, her ears swiveling as though she sensed a tension beneath the stillness. John brushed off his unease. He'd done this walk 100 times. Maybe the wind was just stirring up old instincts, those reflexes that never truly went away. He continued along the path, Scout trotting happily ahead, until they reached the far side of the park where a footbridge spanned a shallow creek. John paused, enjoying the tranquil sound of trickling water. That's when he heard the distant chatter of voices, raspy laughter, a few curses. He caught a glimpse of movement beyond the trees, for figures emerged from the shadows, swaggering with the casual recklessness of people looking for trouble. He considered turning back, but the group had already spotted him. Their conversation lulled, replaced by low, mocking murmurs as they moved closer. Instinctively, John's guard went up. He eased his hold on Scout's leash, giving her enough slack if they needed to maneuver. The tallest of the four, sporting a shaved head and a bulky leather jacket, stepped forward with a crooked grin. "Hey there," the man drawled, eyes flicking to the dog. "Nice night for a stroll." John said nothing, merely nodding. He tried to sidestep, but the group shifted, forming a loose semicircle that blocked the path. Alarm bells rang in John's mind. This was a setup, some random punks itching for intimidation. In the old days, he'd have neutralized them in seconds, but he'd promised himself that life was over. He drew a breath, summoning patience. "Cute dog," said another thug, shorter but broad-shouldered. He squatted down as if to beckon Scout closer, but John tugged the leash gently, keeping her near. "What's her name?" John's voice was quiet. "Scout." "Scout, huh?" The man smirked. "Bet you spoil her. Probably cost you a fortune." He slid a hand into his jacket pocket, pulling out something that glinted under the lamppost light, a switchblade. "We're a bit short on funds tonight. Maybe you can spare a few bucks for the cause." The unspoken threat hung heavy in the air. John's body tensed, but he forced a calm expression. "Let me pass," he said simply. A third figure, wearing a dirty beanie and reeking of alcohol, sneered. "Or what? You gonna bark at us?" The group laughed, as though the idea of John resisting was absurd. Wick's instinct screamed for him to handle this swiftly, but he didn't want violence, especially not with Scout so close. He raised his free hand in a placating gesture. "I don't have much cash," he lied. "I'm just taking my dog for a walk." "Don't have much," Leather Jacket repeated, mocking John's tone. "You sure? We can check." Suddenly, the group tightened the circle, stepping in. The short thug with the switchblade lunged forward, aiming the blade at John's midsection. Reflex took over, John pivoted, hooking the man's wrist and redirecting the thrust. In a swift motion, John disarmed him, flinging the blade out of reach. The thug gasped, eyes widening. Another one swung at John's head. Wick ducked, landing a precise punch to the attacker's ribs. Pain flared in John's knuckles, but he ignored it, focusing on incapacitating them quickly. Scout barked frantically, caught in the swirl of legs and aggression. John had already floored 2 of the men, but the ringleader, the tall one, snatched at the dog's leash, yanking it hard. Scout yelped. Rage seared through Wick. "Leave her alone," he snarled, lunging forward. But the beanie-wearing thug smashed a broken beer bottle across John's shoulder, sending him staggering momentarily. Dazed, John recovered in time to see the tall man scoop Scout off the ground by the scruff. The dog thrashed in panic. "Let her go," John roared. He tried to surge forward, but the other thugs swarmed him. Punches rained in. He managed to block some, but a heavy blow to his gut knocked the wind out of him. Through blurring vision, John glimpsed the tall man carrying Scout deeper into the trees. John tore free from the brawl, ignoring the sting of broken glass cutting his skin. He sprinted after them, heart hammering. Adrenaline roared through his veins, the old lethal grace flooding back. But he was too late. By the time he reached a small clearing, the tall man's savage snarl mixed with Scout's whimpers. John tackled the man, fists pounding. They wrestled violently, rolling across the dirt. Then the man wrenched free, delivering a vicious kick to John's face. Spots danced in Wick's vision as he collapsed onto his side. He tried to stand, but the other thugs were upon him again. Each blow felt like a thunderclap. In a haze of pain, he heard Scout's final yelp of terror. Then everything went silent except for the men's ragged breathing. The tall one spat on the ground, glaring at John's prone form. "Stupid mutt," he growled, wiping sweat from his brow. Blood stained his jacket. "Come on, let's move." Footsteps thudded into the distance. John tried to crawl after them, but his arms trembled, vision spinning. Darkness encroached. He forced himself to look across the clearing. Through the swirl of leaves, he saw Scout's still form. In that instant, a heartbreak so profound it felt like fire in his chest overwhelmed him. He reached out, fingers dragging through the dirt, desperate to get to her. But unconsciousness claimed him first. John Wick awoke to a pale dawn light filtering through the canopy of trees, lying on cold ground, battered and bleeding. His entire body ached, a raw symphony of bruises and cuts. Yet his first thought was not of himself. It was of Scout. He turned, ignoring the agony, and found her motionless where she'd fallen. For a moment, he hoped, prayed, there might be some spark of life left. But when he finally reached her side, the truth carved a hole in his heart. She was gone. A wave of grief, white-hot and all-consuming, crushed him. He cradled her limp body, pressing his forehead gently to her fur. He'd lost so much before. He had tried to escape the chaos, to find some fragile semblance of peace. And now these thugs had ripped away his last shred of solace. Tears burned in the corners of his eyes. But behind that sorrow, something else stirred, an old darkness, the lethal part of him that had once terrified an entire criminal underworld. He closed his eyes, forcing himself to breathe. The bitterness of regret and the fury of vengeance merged into a single violent promise. They will pay. He wasn't sure how he'd track them, or what he'd do exactly, but the vow was forged in blood. No matter how many ghosts he carried inside him, he would not let this stand. Slowly, painfully, John gathered Scout into his arms. He rose unsteadily, face set in grim determination. He would bury her, give her the respect she deserved, and then he would find the men who did this. The tragedy might have awakened the monster he had tried so hard to bury, but they had crossed a line that no one crosses unscathed. They didn't realize whose dog they'd killed. Clenching his jaw, John Wick cast one final, heartbroken glance at the clearing. Then he limped away, carrying Scout's body back toward the only home he had left, mind already fixed on vengeance. If those men thought they had escaped consequence, they were about to learn a harsh truth. No one murders John Wick's dog and lives. A hushed storm gathered behind John Wick's eyes as he stood in the threshold of his living room, the fresh grave in his backyard barely covered with earth. He had buried Scout beneath a towering oak, a spot the dog had loved to doze under on sunny afternoons. There was no funeral, no eulogy, just John's quiet, trembling farewell. His soul felt hollow raw, but a single purpose now filled the void: revenge. Days passed in a blur of preparation. The battered cuts on John's arms and face slowly healed, and bruises faded to dull aches. But each pang of pain reminded him of the men who'd committed that atrocity in the park. He scoured the local news for any mention of late-night violence or a group of thugs bragging about cruelty, but found nothing. That didn't deter him. The world he once ruled ran on rumors and shadows, and though he had stepped away from the game, he still knew where to look. Eventually, John paid a visit to an old acquaintance, Xavier, an information broker who operated from a dingy internet cafe on the outskirts of the city. John had done a few favors for him years back, tracking down stolen data, ensuring certain men disappeared from the equation. In return, Xavier owed him an unspoken debt. When John slipped into the cafe, hood drawn low, Xavier recognized him at once, eyes widening. "John Wick," he whispered, shutting down the nearest computer. "I heard you were out of the game." "I was," John said evenly, taking a seat at the far corner booth. "I need names. For men in their 20s, one tall with a shaved head, another wearing a beanie. They frequent the park on the north side." His eyes flashed with dangerous intent. "They killed my dog." Xavier swallowed hard, as though acknowledging how lethal this mission would become. "I'll see what I can find. Wait here." He returned after half an hour of frantic searching, rummaging through local street gossip, chat logs, and a few shady forums. With a grim nod, he slid a small slip of paper across the table. "There's a rumor about a group calling themselves the Razor Boys. Petty criminals, hopped up on cheap drugs. The tall one is Benny Harlow. He's got a record for assault. Last known hangout, an abandoned auto garage near the old railway tracks." John Wick's eyes locked on the scrap of paper. "Thank you." Xavier cleared his throat. "John, be careful. These guys might be small time, but if they sense you coming, they might have bigger connections. The city's changed since you left. Gangs are more." "I'm not here for a lecture," John interrupted softly, but without hostility. "I owe them something." He patted Xavier on the shoulder as a gesture of thanks, then walked out without another word. Armed with the lead, John spent the next night scouting the auto garage from a distance. The structure was a decaying husk, its yard strewn with rusted car shells and broken glass. Under the flickering glow of a lone floodlight, John counted 3 men loitering outside, passing a bottle and laughing raucously. A battered motorcycle leaned against a dented sedan. The entire place screamed disarray, graffiti scrawled across the walls, empties clinking underfoot. As he observed from behind a chain-link fence, the door to the garage slid open. Out stepped the tall man with the shaved head. Even across the distance, John recognized that crooked grin, the same mocking sneer from the park. A wave of grief and fury surged within him, but he steadied his breath. Patience. Move precisely. He waited until the small hours of the morning, when the men would likely be drunk or passed out. The city's lights twinkled in the distance, oblivious to the storm about to break. At last, John Wick moved like a dark whisper, slipping through a gap in the fence. He carried minimal weaponry, a silenced pistol strapped to his waistband and a combat knife for close quarters. In the old days, he would have walked into a war zone armed to the teeth, but for 4 men, he was enough. He crept along the side of the building, pressing himself against the corrugated metal. A faint glow from inside flickered, maybe a small lamp or the flame of a cigarette. Tuning his senses to the night, John eased open a service door. The rusted hinges squeaked, but not loudly enough to alert the men within. He stepped into a corridor piled high with discarded tires. The stench of motor oil and stale beer hung in the air. The first thug he encountered was half dozing on a makeshift couch near the door. John recognized him as the short, broad-shouldered attacker from the park, the one with the switchblade. Rage coiled in John's chest, but he kept quiet, placing a palm over the man's mouth while driving the knife handle to the back of his skull in a swift strike. The thug's eyes rolled, unconscious. John lowered him gently to avoid noise. Around a corner, 2 more men were huddled over a rickety table, counting a handful of cash. They murmured about a big score soon, maybe a store robbery. John slid behind a stack of crates. He needed to find the tall man. "Benny," who'd inflicted the final blow on Scout. But the other two might complicate matters. Carefully, John leveled his pistol, exhaled, and fired 2 muffled shots. 1 bullet found each chest, dropping them instantly. The table clattered, currency fluttered to the floor. The final man gasped, but he was gone before he could shout. John advanced, heart pounding. No sign of Benny. Then he heard footsteps behind him. Heavy, frantic. He whirled, raising his pistol. Benny lunged out of the shadows, brandishing a shotgun. Their eyes locked. Recognition flashed across Benny's face, followed by terror. "You," he hissed, voice shaking. "You're that guy from—" John didn't let him finish. He fired, but Benny ducked, rolling behind a half-disassembled car chassis. The shotgun boomed in retort, pellets pinging off metal pillars. John flattened himself behind a crate, breath hissing. Benny was cornered but armed. This was the final confrontation John had craved and dreaded. The pain of Scout's death rippled through him. He forced himself to remain calm, peering around the crate to judge angles. "Why are you doing this, man?" Benny's shout echoed in the cavernous garage, voice tinged with desperation. "It was just a stupid dog. You have no idea." John's anger ignited anew. Just a dog. He sprang from cover, firing twice more. The bullets slammed into the chassis, sparking. Benny cursed, returning fire. Shrapnel ricocheted, slicing a line across John's arm. Gritting his teeth, John pressed forward. A final dash behind an overturned work table brought him within a few feet of Benny's position. The tall thug was reloading the shotgun, hands trembling. John seized the moment. He vaulted over the table, using the momentum to disarm Benny in a blinding flurry, kicking the shotgun from his grasp. Benny stumbled, eyes wide. He threw a wild punch. John caught the blow, twisting Benny's arm behind him until the thug collapsed to his knees with a howl of pain. John's voice emerged cold as steel. "Scout," he growled. Her name was Scout. Benny stared at him, confusion blending with terror. "You? Why, you're insane," he wheezed. John jammed his gun under Benny's chin. "No," he corrected, voice trembling with raw fury. "You took everything I had left." His finger tensed on the trigger. Benny paled, mouth opening and closing as if searching for an excuse. But John saw no remorse, only fear for his own life. In that split second, John remembered the heartbreak of losing Scout, that helplessness as she cried out for him. The boogeyman, once dormant, was fully awakened. He pulled the trigger. The sound was subdued, a final, hushed punishment. Benny slumped, eyes vacant. The echo of the shot lingered, reverberating in the emptiness of the garage. Silence fell once again. No more taunts, no more defiance. John Wick stood motionless, heart hammering, blood trickling from the shallow cut on his arm. He felt the weight of everything. The grief, the vengeance, the knowledge that this was the path he had tried so hard to leave behind. He stared at Benny's lifeless form, the man who had so casually stolen a precious life. In that moment, John felt no triumph, only a hollow relief that justice, in its brutal form, had been served. He retrieved the shotgun, discarding shells to ensure no evidence linked him. Then he walked through the carnage, stepping over the bodies without flinching. Outside, dawn was breaking, bathing the desolate yard in a pale glow. Sirens were faint in the distance, or perhaps just a figment of his heightened senses. Either way, he knew it was time to vanish. He slipped out the way he came, back through the fence, ghost-like in his exit. In the days that followed, rumors spread in the underbelly of the city. An unknown assailant had slaughtered the Razor Boys in their lair, leaving behind a scene of silent, ruthless efficiency. Some whispered it was the return of a legendary figure, a man once known for unstoppable wrath when his peace was threatened. No official leads emerged, no arrests made. The trail was cold, just as John Wick intended. Eventually, John stood once more by Scout's grave under the oak tree, a single flower clasped in his hand. He set it gently on the mound of earth, feeling the crisp autumn breeze stir. He bowed his head, memories flooding him. The wag of her tail, the warmth of her presence, the unconditional love that had anchored him to a gentler world. Now that world was gone, replaced by the old shadows creeping back. But for the moment, he was still free, unbound by contracts or obligations. The men who dared kill his dog had paid. No one else needed to be hurt, unless fate threw another challenge in his path. He turned away from the grave, stepping into the half-lit yard. The burdens of grief clung to him, but so did the faint echoes of a promise, Scout's memory, urging him to find some measure of peace, if only he could. He'd done what he had to do. He had avenged her. And if the underworld thought they could ignore the name John Wick or mock his losses again, they would learn, painfully, that some lines are never crossed without consequence. And so, though his heart lay shattered, he walked on, alone but resolute, the ghost of a dog's spirit guiding him onward. He was John Wick, and for better or worse, that name would always carry bloodshed in its wake whenever love was torn from his grasp.